Transactional, the failed Donald J. Trump presidency, fall of an American tyrant. Narration by Janice M. Brown, a proud Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma Native American story. The scene opens with a drone shot of the beautiful Black Lives Matter Plaza, the historical art display of the Black Lives Matter movement that Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser had installed as a tribute with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement project, which originally arose from the outrage in the black community over the George Floyd murder by then rogue cop Derek Chauvin. The gesture was a way to show solidarity of a local government. The gesture was a way to show solidarity of a local government amidst the rise of increasing incidents of racially charged police brutality towards black and brown bodies of American citizens. Mayor Muriel Bowser understood the assignment. She understood the assignment and the outrage. She understood the assignment and the outrage and stood out as an example of how to resist authoritarian doctrine. Muriel Bowser, as an elected black woman, had every right to support, protect, and ensure that constitutional freedom of speech was a right that was not just for the unrepresented residents of Washington, D.C., but as a beacon of strength for all Americans. The measure of true leadership is in doing what's right and what's fair and just, even in the face of terrible odds, when bending the knee would make life so much easier. Doing the right thing and just thing in local government and as a public servant is a powerful tool of independence to use as a show of solidarity to an unjust, racist, sexist, over-policing of black and brown bodies across the country. The very existence of the phrase Black Lives Matter has long irritated Donald Trump because he doesn't want you to believe it. He doesn't want you to believe, and he will double and triple down on the weakest of provocations, just because in his mind he's winning that argument. No one believes that whites are in any way superior to blacks, and if you do, then you're not living in reality. Donald Trump only wants his own facts and won't allow truth to be imposed upon him ever. Donald Trump has always been so sick with his twisted fixation on race-baiting, scapegoating, and dog whistle, violence-laced rhetoric that he's even created a space to brag and showboat his vile bigotry and laugh at his enemies at the same time. So predictable is the political class that Donald Trump knows no one will ever hold him to a normal standard for decency. That's evident today, August 14, 2025, and it was evident on January 6, 2021. The press doesn't even mention race when covering Donald Trump's anti-American creed of e pluribus unum, out of many one. The press presses on as if oblivious to any of Donald Trump's wrongdoing, as if nothing bad counts against him because why? Nobody knows. Why? No one knows. No one knows why Jake Tapper would be paid to write about Joe Biden when Donald Trump is so clearly in decline. Trump revels in evil deeds and isn't embarrassed by filth, and often forces so-called decent people to join him in his evil schemes. Schemes against norms, standards, and anything that seems right or good and helps people. No, Donald Trump seems to use blackmail, threats, weaponizing of the law, revoking professionals' jobs, firing those who are qualified, and replacing them by intentionally hiring unqualified hacks to high office, and then gloating unashamedly. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is probably the most dangerous and inept head of any agency that I've ever seen confirmed by Congress in a full-fledged life and death health situation. Projection, distraction, and discord are always the breaking news headlines for the maximum Trump effect. The mainstream media only cares about ratings and money, and if it bleeds, it leads. The Donald Trump 2.0 show has become a favorite for the cable companies. Infotainment wars and regular partisan hacks. The Trump era campaign rallying cry will be segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. For a dictator wannabe, Donald J. Trump, he will amplify racial division as long as he appears to be the strong man. He'll use his Trump card for all of the items that he can use against anyone else. For all of his mentally disturbed MAGA voter base who have co-opted everything from everyone else and claimed it as their own, the MAGA have even co-opted black culture terms themselves, woke, DEI, as triggers to scapegoat black folk, women, LGBTQ community, Jews, immigrants, foreign allies, and attack blue state governors to marginalize any group opposed to Donald Trump's doctrines. It is ironic, of course, because Mayor Muriel Bowser, who was elected in 2015, had at that time been reelected to serve in D.C. more times than Donald Trump had run and been elected himself. The fact that the race card didn't work to help Trump win over enough white people to reelect him was a very hard pill to swallow. And the landslide election and popular votes' rejection of him personally only added to his already wounded ego. Bragging was one of the things that had always worked to distract mainstream lemmings who to this day continue to prop up this lying carnival barking con man and his Republican sycophants, donors, and various complicit accomplices to help him in his coup plot. No longer content with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell stacking the Supreme Court with insane, unconstitutional, unitary executive-believing, extreme religious zealots and dangling bribes to pay off GOP Heritage Foundation creeps, capitalists, monopolists, dictators, billionaires, and MAGA minions from Project 2025. Republicans seem to turn into zombies, hungry for brains, in search of someone to hurt and harm. Well-known politicians lose all their integrity, basic manners, and shame with no dignity. They proceed to carry out Donald Trump's vendettas in his name. The GOP strategy reverted to pure Civil War factions. And now they're offering to anyone else willing to take money, like ICE agents, convicted Trump-supporting criminals, bad cops, and U.S. military to destroy democracy upon King Donald's illegal orders. Today, January 6, 2001, the GOP decided that they had heard the American people and they shunned Donald Trump's rhetoric to return to a darker time in America when some citizens were only counted as 2/3 of a person, and the government was the inciter of violence. And to our credit, we rejected that. Congress stood their ground against Donald Trump's seditious orders, and certified Joseph R. Biden as the 46th President of the United States of America. No one signed up for violence, anti-American policies, and lawlessness, even with a Supreme Court that had just rolled over to entertain Donald Trump's every whim. Donald Trump's humiliating loss on the national and international stage was devastating, and it was beginning to sink in. And it was only fueling his anger and causing the former leader to refuse to adhere to the U.S. Constitution and vacate his office as described in the Constitution. No, today, January 6th, the American people elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the final unbearable straw that broke the man's mania. It was an unforgivable insult to Donald's famously racist, sexist, fragile ego. His fixations about prominent blacks, about strong women, minorities, immigrants, athletes, comedians, musicians, actors, business owners, and whomever happened to be in opposition, even in his very utterances and ideals. These things were unbearable for the man. The more qualified, accomplished, and educated anyone was, for instance, Fed Chair Jerome Powell or Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump must deny that unless Trump proclaims a thing, that the thing doesn't exist, which is magical thinking. Trump's infantile fantasy world is a constant maintenance project for those who must clean up and spin his completely nonsensical ramblings into something that sounds, well, not insane completely. The press eats it up, hook, line, and sinker, every single time. Facts never get discussed, and Trump is allowed to carry on with his Festivus of grievances day in and day out, every news cycle. The more envious and intolerant Donald becomes, the wilder his lies, projections, and accusations of others he tosses out like red meat to his base of MAGA carnivores. It's an odd mental shortcoming for such a supposed strong man. Women especially injure Trump's manhood whenever they oppose him. Even racial minorities don't come close to the injury that women and girls seem to cause Donald Trump. My ancestors are the first Americans, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. So whenever I hear this asshole use American Indians as a pejorative, yes, I cringe and I want to throw up. Right in his ugly face. Thank God nobody is intimidated by any of Donald Trump's bullshit insults. And that's evidenced by his constant bullying of Senator Elizabeth Warren. Trump thinks he's hurting indigenous people whenever this 34-time convicted felon calls Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas as a slur. He knows everyone else would retaliate. He knows anyone else would retaliate against such speech. Elizabeth Warren is way too classy. Donald Trump lost the election in a landslide in spite of his nasty bigotry, which he loves to display whenever his fragile little feelings get hurt, as if his crazy cruelty makes up for his utter ineptitude. Donald Trump's stupid insults and lame-ass nicknames only let everyone know how fucked up he is in the head. No grown-ass man has time for all the adolescent games and fucked up revenge plots that Donald Trump indulges himself in 24/7 on TV, in photo ops, and all over the social media, because it's juvenile. But Trump believes in inserting himself in your life against your wishes, making him look and sound tough. That's just what dictators do. They're weak and they're fearful and they don't want to be called out. Trump's use of the name Pocahontas is not only a blatant racist slight against all Native Americans, but it's also toys with the white supremacy as a conquering white race of Christian founders of America that chased the Indians off their land in a brave show of superiority. Nothing could be further from the truth. When the Pilgrims landed in America, they were suffering from disease and famine and the weather, and the Indians saved and helped them survive through those winters and became friends after that. That's why we have a United States, because they decided to forge ahead together as the United States. Maybe not voluntarily in the beginning, but now it is. So, okay. Trump's asinine strongman act serves as projection that only a white man could possibly represent the Make America Great Again anthem. Is that what you want to call it? American exceptionalism that Trump himself so sorely lacks. He doesn't even know anything about Pocahontas, besides the fact that Pocahontas was a Native American hero, whereas Donald Trump's own family had to immigrate from Germany to America to seek a better life. And then decades later, Melania received her citizenship with a questionable genius visa under circumstances, curiously, that no one can verify. Lies, media, and rejection is how Donald Trump takes his own weakness, like accusing Barack Obama of not being a citizen, when clearly it's projection that Trump's family immigrating from another country and reverse engineering the facts to skew to his Earth 2 fantasy version of reality. Yes. Furthermore, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were the ones who introduced the now famous couple. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were best friends, as testified to in court with statements from Jeffrey Epstein himself under oath. Clearly, there is a mountain of evidence that there was a relationship between the two men. So why then is Donald Trump hiding from that evidence, which may be discovered in the Epstein files if they ever get released? So why is Donald Trump denying having a close relationship with the convicted pedophile couple? Today, Donald Trump can't control the narrative. Today, there is no presidential immunity for the two-time loser. It's over. Today, January 6th, 2021, feels a lot like September 10th, 2001. Everyone can feel the electricity in the air, as the former president has finished his extremely volatile and defiant swan song of imaginary grievances, denials of fact, and math, and the mounting evidence of court losses that pile up. The pressure mounts from his most loyal supporters, and all to no avail. The scene begins with yet more of Donald Trump's personal attacks on everyone from the generals on the ground, reassuring allies that all is under control when clearly it wasn't. Trump complained to everyone, from his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, to Republican impeachment witness leader Kevin McCarthy, to his mortal nemesis, Senator Liz Cheney and Rep. Adam Kinzinger. Even Trump's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, had to tell Donald Trump that it was bullshit that the election was stolen from him. There was no election interference in 2016 and 2020. The evidence in 2016 pointed to Russia as influencing the election to help Donald Trump. No one has denied that. In 2020, the same interference was attempted, yet the elections were not interfered with. Donald Trump had everyone from Nancy Pelosi to congressional Republican members who were in fear of their lives begging him to concede and vacate the White House so that they can continue with the certification of the votes for Joe Biden, as was their constitutional duty. Donald was defiant to everyone, including DOJ attorneys Pat Cipollone and attorney Eric Hirschman, even to his previous presidential running mate Mike Pence. Today, the loser of the free and fair election had chosen to lead an insurrection, to hold on to power instead of allowing the peaceful transfer of power. Today, as the timeline unfolds, it feels like September 11th, 2001, and we all remember where we were when we saw the towers fall. We all remember where we were when we saw the rioters storm the Capitol, pass the barriers, brutalize police officers, and enter the Capitol to stop the transfer of power. Today, January 6, 2021, events are escalating. The D.C. Capitol Police are woefully unprepared as the narrative begins to unfold. I was watching, just like the rest of the world. I saw things, we all saw things with our own eyes as law and order devolved into a bloody riot of Trump's faithful who followed their dear leader and his orders when he said, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and fight like hell." This is the scene that unraveled throughout that day. This is the scene that unraveled throughout that fateful day, January 6, 2021, and into a violent, deadly, horrifying night of terror by the hands of a former president of the United States, now focused and determined to become tyrant, Donald John Trump. Act 2. The scene opens with a wide-shot flyover of Black Lives Matter Plaza. There had been some anti-Trump protesters in Washington, D.C. the previous night on January 5th, 2021, but it was more subdued in anticipation of a hopeful new day with the swearing in inauguration of President-elect Joseph Robinette Biden from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and for the first woman of color, former governor of the great state of California, Vice Presidential-elect Kamala Harris. Donald Trump is a thief. He is a stealer of once-in-a-lifetime moments from people, many times strangers who become targets of his retribution for denying him his fake news narrative he's created for himself. Trump lies are legendary. Trump stole Democrat Hillary Clinton's historic opportunity to become the first female president with the assistance of Russia. Russia assisted the election of Trump, period. Donald has never been able to function alone without having to pay operatives to carry out whatever insane notion he might dream up. That's his power. Create fake news, pay to broadcast, to print the lies or tweets, then jump out ahead of the big story and wax poetically about how it'd be great. It would be so great, terrible, dangerous, or genius, or whatever outrageous story he's prepared with other allies of deception like Rupert Murdoch to dupe the public. Yeah. The bigger the lie, the harder he works to force it into everyone's reality, whether we like it or not. That's the definition of rape. The word no is never to be presented to Donald Trump, ever. He can't fathom it, so everyone around him makes his oral fixations their oral fixations and will parrot and mimic whatever obscene, idiotic, ugly, or insane utterance that falls out of his shithole. I wish Jake Tapper could have made just one interesting observation about Trump's demented behavior instead of an entire Earth 2 edition of Joe Biden's diminished state. How did Donald Trump pay his way back into power after 2 impeachments? Why did the Supreme Court take so long to rule on his criminal cases? We may never know. They used to say the cover-up is worse than the crime. I think that's a myth, something those who are involved in the crimes would say. What would you rather happen? These MAGA Republicans could give a damn about how shameful their grifting is. They love money, they love power, and corruption, they love it. Any order, it doesn't matter, but what they can't do is follow the rules. Laws have never applied to those rich and powerful enough to execute a cover-up and a coup simultaneously. The coup plot failed on January 6th, 2021, but it still had some of as unyet known supporters from inside the co-conspirators within the GOP Congress. The drone shot sails through from the outside into the West Wing, in the room where it happened. Inside the Oval Office dining room of the White House sat the former 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. The defeated commander-in-chief stared transfixed on the TV screen, the mob, like a Martin Scorsese film where he was the hero, and he was watching with pride as his MAGA army of minions had followed his marching orders to fight like hell for Trump. Defiant, Donald stood his ground as his devotees stormed the U.S. House of Representatives, which had convened as it was their constitutional duty to swear in the 46th president in a peaceful transfer of power as they had done for the previous 246 years without incident, until today, January 6, 2021. Department of Justice Attorney Pat Cipollone and attorneys Eric Hirschman could be heard entering the scene. Here is a recounting of that testimony with some of my creative embellishments for dramatic effect. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your attention to this matter.
Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like now for us to listen to a description, your description of what transpired in the West Wing during the attack. For context, in this clip, you describe the time frame starting at about 2 p.m.
So I remember Mark being alone in his office for quite some time, and I know we've spoken about Ben Williamson going in at one point, and I don't personally remember Ben going in. I don't doubt that he had gone in, but I remember him being alone in his office for most of the afternoon, around 2 o'clock to 2:05. Around 2 o'clock to 2:05, we were watching the TV, and I could see that the rioters were getting closer and closer to the Capitol. Mark still hadn't popped out of his office or said anything about it. So that's when I went into his office. I saw that he was sitting on his couch, on his cell phone. Same as the morning where he was just kind of scrolling and typing. I said, "Hey, are you watching the TV, Chief?" Because his TV was small, and you can see it, but I didn't know if he was really paying attention. I said, "Are you watching the TV, Chief?" And he was like, "Yeah." So, the rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president? He said, "No, he wants to be alone right now." Still looking at his phone. So I start to get frustrated because I sort of felt like I was watching this is not a great comparison, but a bad car accident that was about to happen where you can't stop it, but you want to be able to do something. And I remember thinking in that moment, Mark needs to snap out of this, and I don't know how to snap him out of this, but he needs to care. And I just remember I blurted out, I said, Mark, do you know where Jim's at right now? And he looked up at me at that point and said, Jim? And I said, Mark, he was on the floor a little while ago giving a floor speech. Did you listen? He said, yeah, it was real good. Did you like it? And I said, yeah. Do you know where he's at right now? He said, well, no, I haven't heard from him. And I said, you might want to check in with him, Mark. And I remember pointing at the TV, and I said, the rioters are getting close. They might get in. And he looked at me and said something to the effect of, all right, I'll give him a call.
Not long after the rioters broke into the Capitol, you described what happened with White House counsel Pat Cipollone.
No more than a minute and a half later, I see Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office and rushed right in, looked at me, said, is Mark in his office? And I said, yes. He just looked at me and started shaking his head and went over, opened Mark's office door, stood there with the door propped open, and said something to Mark is still sitting on his phone. I remember glancing and he's still sitting on his phone. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, the rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now. And Mark looked up at him and said, he doesn't want to do anything, Pat. And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly had said this to Mark, something to the effect of, Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control. I'm going down there. And at that point, Mark stood up from his couch, both of his phones in his hand. He had his glasses on still. He walked out with Pat. He put both of his phones on my desk and said, let me know if Jim calls. And they walked out and went down to the dining room.
A few minutes later, Representative Jordan called back.
A couple minutes later, so likely around between 2:15 and 2:25. I know the tweet went out at 2:24. I don't remember if I was there when the tweet went out or if it happened right afterwards, but Jim had called. I answered the phone, said 1 second. He knew it was, I guess he knew it was me. I introduced myself, but I don't remember if he called my cell phone or if he had called one of Mark's. But I answered the phone and said, 1 sec, Mark's on the hall, I'm going to go hand the phone to him. He said, okay. So I went down, I asked the valet if Mark was in the dining room. Valet said yes. I opened the door to the dining room, briefly stepped in to get Mark's attention, showed him the phone, flipped the phone his way so he could see it said Jim Jordan. He had stepped to where I was standing there holding the door open, took the phone talking to Jim with the door still propped open. So I took a few steps back. So I probably was 2 feet from Mark. He was standing in the doorway going to the Oval Office dining room. They had a brief conversation, and in the crossfires, I heard briefly what they were talking about, but in the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point talking about the hang Mike Pence chants.
That clip ended, Ms. Hutchinson, with you recalling that you heard the President, Mr. Meadows, and the White House counsel discussing the hang Mike Pence chants. And then you described for us what happened next.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office. And when Mark had said something to the effect of, he doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the hang Mike Pence chants in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung.
Let me pause here on this point. As rioters chanted hang Mike Pence, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, Mike deserves it, and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that he has expressed at other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting hang Mike Pence last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
President Trump's view that the rioters were not doing anything wrong and that, quote, Mike deserved it, helps us to understand why the president did not ask the rioters to leave the Capitol for multiple hours. In fact, he put this tweet out at 2:24 p.m. Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall seeing this tweet in which the president said the vice president did not have the courage to do what needed to be done?
I do.
And Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. It was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie. And it was something that was really hard in that moment to digest, knowing what I had been hearing down the hall in the conversations that were happening, seeing that tweet come up and knowing what was happening on the Hill. And it's something that I still struggle to work through the emotions of that.